so today I wanted to talk about the parable of the lost children. And you're probably thinking, lost children? I don't remember a parable about lost children. Well, that's the prodigal son. But I think that what I want to talk about today is how this parable really is about two lost children and their parent. So how many of you are the oldest child in your family? Raise your hands. Okay, so a few of us. How many of you are the youngest? Ooh, lots of youngest. Okay. Middle. I figured most of the middle children wouldn't even expect to be asked. They're always kind of forgotten in the middle. And then we won't even talk about only children. My son is an only child, and that's a whole sermon on its own. So here we have a parable being shared by Jesus about a youngest child and an oldest child. I come from a Presbyterian background, so I've heard this parable a number of times over the years, and it bugs me every time I hear it as an oldest child. So my sympathies, for obvious reasons, are with the older brother. I always, as I heard it, I always thought, gosh, those younger children, they're always getting away with, everything, and here's the older child who stayed home and done the right thing, and he never gets the fatted calf. So I kind of wanted to put this into context on a historical basis. This is one of three parables on redemption that Jesus told following the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. And these are called the lost parables for good reason. So, and just to remind ourselves, a parable in the Bible illustrates a moral or a spiritual lesson. And the word parable comes from Greek, meaning to place beside, or to basically be able to compare. And so this is the method of teaching that Jesus used the most often. The parable of the lost sheep is about a shepherd who leaves his flock of 99 sheep to fend for themselves while he goes to find the one sheep that is missing. The shepherd finds the sheep, he rejoices, he carries it back on his shoulders, which you've probably seen in a lot of art, and announces it to one and all that he has found the one missing sheep. And so usually we see that a lost sheep represents a lost human being that has been found. The second parable is the parable of the lost coin. This involves a woman who is desperate to find one of her 10 silver coins. The coins would likely be worth to her 10 days of wages, or the family savings, or her dowry that she's wearing as an ornament. And in her very small dark house that probably does not have much in the way of windows, she must light an oil lamp. And she's expending a valuable resource to find that coin. For unity, these coins might represent our potential substance to fulfill our daily requirements. So it's very important that she find this coin. And she does find the coin. So that's the important part, that Jesus is basically showing us that it's just as important to find the one lost sheep or the one lost coin as it is to care for the rest of our sheep or our coins or money. It's important also to realize that Jesus told this in a context of dealing with the Pharisees. His audience for the parables, these three parables, were the Pharisees and the scribes. These are the representatives of the religious establishment at that time. And the Pharisees interpreted Jewish law. They decided what constituted right or wrong behavior. And so the Pharisees were unhappy with Jesus. They felt that he had surrounded himself with sinners, with the tax collectors, and with the outcasts of Jewish society. So the tax collectors were the people who collected taxes for the Romans. They were Jews, so they were placed in the position of having to basically collect the taxes for the Romans. And so there was a lot of payoff, graft, kickbacks, etc. So these were not well-respected people. These were people who basically were avoided by the rest of society. The sinners were the worst bunch of people. They were the dregs of society. They were the people that nobody else spoke to, nobody else wanted to be around. So these three parables are told by Jesus after the Pharisees and the religious leaders accused Jesus of welcoming and eating with sinners. Now notice that the Pharisees did not complain about Jesus teaching sinners, since the Pharisees thought themselves to be righteous teachers of the law and all others to be wicked. They could not condemn his preaching to these people, but they did think that it was inconsistent with the dignity of somebody who knew as much about the scripture as Jesus did to eat with sinners. So Jesus is addressing the disdain of the Pharisees for Jesus' habit of welcoming all sinners to him in these three parables. In these parables, he's actually rebuking the Pharisees, saying, "How dare you say that I can't mix with tax collectors and sinners? How dare you accuse me of that? These people have not led a good life. These are the ones that need to be brought back into the flock. These are the lost sheep. These are the 1 coin of the 10. They are the prodigal child. So how dare you judge me? I am here for them." The Pharisees, of all people, should have been rejoicing with Jesus that these people were coming back to the flock, establishing or celebrating their disenchanted wanderers, that they were on their way home. Instead, they griped and they complained. They were judgmental. Why is that? Well, the Pharisees we can see as the sheep that had never left the field. When the shepherd went out to find that one sheep, the rest stayed back. They were the good sheep. They were the sheep that didn't need a lot of guidance. They basically stayed where they were. But their heart might have been pretty far from the shepherd. They knew what they needed to do. They were, doing the right thing. But they maybe weren't as attuned to what Jesus was talking about, or even to the shepherd, as they should have been. And also the Pharisees were like the lost coin. They were still at home. The coin was still in the house. But they were nevertheless lost and out of spiritual circulation. So that coin that was lost has basically been, somehow thrown to the floor or fallen to the floor. And again, it's not in the spiritual circulation. It's not working with the teachings that it should be. So these two examples of how the Pharisees were basically could be seen in these parables kind of brings us to the question of, do I have something lost or misplaced at home, or am I out of spiritual circulation? Am I like the coin? Am I like the sheep that's lost? So what does it mean when you're lost, when you're misplaced, or you're out of spiritual circulation? How do you know if you are lost? Well, in these parables, lost means being out of spiritual circulation. It means being away from safety and in a place of danger. It means that you are uninformed about a better way to live. It means you are not serving God for all the wrong reasons. So lost can be thought of as being spiritually immature. You're not mature in your beliefs, your faith. You may not be getting everything out of the teachings that you could. Lost is waking up one day and realizing that among your most valuable treasures on earth, among your family members, there is one who is lost and out of spiritual circulation. Misplaced is also being where you're not supposed to be. Lost or misplaced means that we do not really know where we belong or how to get there. Lost is having no valid point of reference outside of self. So on to the prodigal children, and we all know the story. The youngest son asks for and receives his share of the inheritance from the father. Now, in this society, when somebody had vast wealth, as this father apparently has. His oldest son gets 2 shares when he dies, and the rest are split among the rest of the children. So this youngest son is not waiting for his inheritance. He's not waiting for the father to die. He's basically saying, I'm out of here. I want my share. I want my share of money, and I'm going to go do something else. And so this is basically tantamount, again, in this society, to spitting on your father and basically wishing him dead, because ordinarily you would only get that inheritance if he were dead. So this is really out of the normal. This is out of something that's really understandable at that time, and probably even at this time, for a child to come in and say, I'd just like my share, and then I'm out of here. I don't need to stick around. So he not only asks for his share of the inheritance, but he asks for the right to dispose of his share. And since the father has the right to live off of those proceeds as long as the father lives, it means the son wished his father dead. It's a betrayal of all the family and community values. And we know the rest. The King James Version says, the younger son took his journey to a far country and there wasted his substance in riotous living. So that leaves to your imagination. Well, actually, the parable goes into some of the living that he does. And that's where the word prodigal comes from. You don't see the word prodigal in this parable. It's characterized by carelessly and foolishly wasting money. And so the younger son ends up being a reckless spendthrift. He loses all his money, and he ends up in a swineherd as a shepherd, lowest of the low, feeding and being fed pig food, and he has hit bottom. And he's in a foreign country, he's in a distant country, he's with strangers, and he does not have, even his self-respect remaining. So here we sit with the prodigal son. He's had his good times, and he is finally at the end of it. So as we're with the word lost, as I previously talked about with the sheep and the coin parables, what does it mean to leave home, as this prodigal son has done, or to be in another country? As you probably expected, it is not just the physical absence from home. When we leave our home, we leave our faith. When I don't believe that I am loved, unless I have to keep proving myself worthy, when I think I have to earn love, if I do this, maybe this person will love me. If I can, do that, then I will have the approval of my family and the love that comes from approval. When I think that I have to earn love through determined efforts and hard work, when I push myself to gain acceptance, and who among us does not do that, to basically think, if I look good or if I act good, then I will receive the affirmations of everybody around me, of my parents or whoever is important to me, or God. That's leaving home. That's being outside the ken of where we should be. If we feel anger, if we feel jealousy, if we feel a desire for revenge, lust or greed, we're in another country. And that's pretty easy to kind of catch yourself, finding yourself jealous of somebody else, of somebody who gets a promotion at work, somebody that you started out with at work who's kind of rocketing up the ladder, and you're basically staying where you are. As soon as you start to feel that's basically leaving the country. That's leaving home. And if I wonder why somebody has hurt me or rejected me, or if I'm just ignored, nobody's paying attention to me, my friends have kind of drifted away, or my friends are in a different place. When I sulk about being somebody or about somebody else's success, if I'm lonely and I'm not reaching out and I don't like the way the world is treating me, I have traveled to another country. So when we see the prodigal son leave his home and move out, that is basically for us, when we move away, that is traveling to another country, that is being away from home. So just a few more examples. When I daydream about being rich and powerful, above all else, forgetting my teachings and my trainings, forgetting about God, I have left home. I have left for the distant country. When I am so afraid of being disliked or blamed, put aside and ignored, if I'm constantly developing strategies for myself to defend myself, well, if I do this, then they'll like me, or if I do this, my boss will give me the job, then I basically am lost again. I am not basically turning to God within and to basically come and deal with that. So as he hits bottom in the distant country, the younger son is struck with a thought, and God knocks on the door to his heart. And when he comes to himself, and that means coming to your higher self in a metaphysical way, he listens to the voice of God and says, I will arise and go to my father. How many of you have heard the faint rapping or maybe the pounding of God on the door to your heart? The younger son was never out of the realm of God. When he was ready to listen, God spoke. But perhaps the younger son has not yet come far enough in this parable. On his way home, he's still preparing and retelling, scenarios and stories for himself. He's thinking to his father, treat me like a hired man. And again, what's the other side of that? If you treat me like a hired man, I can earn your approval. I can do something better, and then you'll love me again. He's saying, I'm not worthy. I don't deserve it. Or the worst, it's too late now. I will never be able to gain this acceptance or this love or what I really need from my father, my community, my family, whoever it is that you're making up these scenarios or these stories for. The younger son is still thinking of a God who needs an explanation, as a God who only offers conditional love. I will love you if you do this. I will love you if you do that. And as a home, he's thinking of home as a place that he is not yet fully sure of. So let me repeat that because this is really important. He's still thinking of God who needs an explanation or God who offers conditional love. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, darn it, I misspoke again. I really didn't mean to speak as meanly as I did, or I did not mean to sit in judgment of somebody else. Oh, God won't love me now. That never goes away, but that does mean that you're not in sync with God. You're not in sync with who you really are. And so basically, he is still entertaining doubts as to whether he can be truly welcomed, that he cannot believe that although his failings are great, grace is always greater. God's grace is always greater than anything we can imagine. By the time the youngest child reaches home, he is clear. He has had time that basically his travel to home gives him a chance to clarify. It gives us, when we're basically sitting ourselves down and taking some time where we're not doing anything else, to basically be able to relax and to basically be clear that we have no excuses. The Bible says, he said, I have sinned, or for us, we have come home. We have basically left that foreign country and we have come back home. Metaphysically, the younger child is our undeveloped awareness of our true spiritual nature. So that's why I said earlier, he's spiritually immature. That's a nature that tends to let our ego get in the way. We use our inheritance, our manifested good from our Father, and sometimes we go to a far country, perhaps a material consciousness, one that really is focused on earning a good living, becoming rich and famous, or just rich, to basically have more of what we need. And then we forget our connection to spirit. So when we awaken to the truth of who we really are, as the younger son does, and go back to our Father, the Christ Spirit, we find happiness, peace, and prosperity. So that's the younger son. But here's the oldest child, and the person that I kind of identify with. As I've heard this parable over the years, I have not heard a lot of discussion of the oldest child. We mostly hear about the youngest child returning, the grace of God, welcome back to the fold. And at best, he seems to have been put in the story as maybe a foil to the father, that he is seeming to make the father's joy and forgiveness even more stark. Because I don't think we necessarily always expect that father is going to be as welcoming as he is in the story. I think that always surprised me that the father runs out, doesn't even wait for the son to come in, but runs out to meet him. And so the oldest child does not look so good in this story. He basically, in fact, looks like a stick in the mud. While everybody's partying, he's standing on the side just glowering. And why not? He stayed home, he followed in his father's footsteps, and he did what the eldest son is supposed to do. He is a virtuous man. And his father never killed a fatted calf for him. He thinks that he has to live up to the expectations of the parent, if only in his own mind. He has to be dutiful, obedient, aim to please, fear being a disappointment to his parents. He has probably always had a certain amount of envy towards his younger siblings, who are much more free to do their own thing. But here with the oldest child, obedience and duty have become a burden, and service has become slavery. The oldest child has not allowed himself to live a free life. He is lost as a resentful saint without joy. He is self-righteous, he is jealous. Although he is right at home, just like the coin, he too is a foreigner in his own house. He has traveled to another country. He is our moralistic and judgmental poverty consciousness. And I'll say that again. By what the oldest child is in this story is our moralistic and judgmental poverty consciousness. He blocks his abundance with doubt, fear, faithlessness, impatience, jealousy, any other kind of error consciousness that you can think of. And like the younger child who's a spendthrift with money, the older child is a spendthrift with self-pity. These error messages separate us from enjoying the abundance that we can have. For both the prodigal and the eldest son, it is the story of God who searches for each person and who does not rest until he has found each person and each person has found him. We are embraced by arms that will allow us to find the life that we most desire. Emmett Fox suggests that this parable is written for everybody, regardless of what level of understanding we are on. The plain and simple lesson is that it's never too late to pray or to turn to God. He suggests that the older son is our higher nature and the prodigal son is our lower nature. Generally, until we get into trouble, until we suffer, until we fear, doubt, until we're sick or we have misfortune, we often don't turn back to God. Meanwhile, the higher self, who knows the truth, but sometimes forgets it, that self is still with the Father. Like the prodigal son, we believe the truth. We are in our Father's house, but there is a time when we let our lower self, our selfish desires and emotions, lead us into going off into a strange country. But again, by doing so, we separate ourselves from the source of our abundance and well-being. We fail to appreciate our good when we're standing right in the middle of it. One of the things that I like most about this parable is that the end has been left open. We're not told what happens to the prodigal son. We're not told what happens to the elder son. So we don't know if the youngest son finally hits the straight and narrow. We don't know how the eldest son gets out of himself and into a more forgiving, generous nature. But here's part of the answer. We will become the third entity in the story. The Father, or God, only desires to bring us all home to Him. The Father's love is not dependent on the behavior of the sons. It does not matter what those sons do. They can leave and lose all their money. They can stay and work, but forget to be grateful for what they do. But basically, the Father's love is not dependent on the behavior of the sons. In the story, the Father welcomes the oldest son just as He did to the younger, urging him to come to the party and saying, "My child, you are with me always, and all that I have is yours." God's love for you is not based on your behavior. The Father is not judgmental. He doesn't slap the oldest son upside the head and say, "Get over yourself," as you kind of want him to do. The Father, and I think this is important, the Father does not defend himself to the oldest son. The Father does not launch into a big story or excuse or, tell the son, "Well, here's why I'm doing this, for your brother." He just basically very calmly assures the eldest son of his love and wants him to come into the home as well. Instead, he offers unconditional love, which eliminates any possibility that one son is loved more than the other. He sees both their highly unique gifts and shortcomings. In my house, there are many places to live. So how do I get over myself as the oldest child? I can trust and I can have faith that God does not compare. In a world that constantly compares people, ranking them as more or less intelligent, more or less attractive, more or less successful, it's not easy to believe that love does not do the same. With a world so full of grades, scores, prizes, even on Facebook, we're constantly asked to take these little tests that show whether we know more than other people know. There's a constant source of testing and comparing going on in the world. I am constantly called upon to measure myself against all others. Instead, I need to trust that God loves with a divine love that recognizes the uniqueness of every person. I can stop searching for God in the outer world. All I really need to do is basically accept. God has always been there to know me and to love me. I can also rejoice and be grateful. I can celebrate the small things, things that are hidden and hardly noticed in the whole scheme of things. Instead, every day as we listen to NPR or whatever radio or TV we listen to, instead of being prepared to receive bad news or to read about wars, violence, crimes, to witness conflicts, to be sad over the state of the world, I can choose to trust the light in the darkness of the world. I need to be able to see the joy and hear the goodness that belongs to God. And in the long run, I don't have to do anything except get out of my own way. The Father and I are one. I am open and willing to accept that I already possess all that I am seeking. Lastly, and most importantly, I do not have to stay in the position of the judgmental oldest child in this story. And I think that's really important. And another reason why I love this, that it doesn't have an ending. I can basically get out of my position as the judgmental oldest child. I open myself to God and I hear the knock on the door of my heart and I answer it. I assume my place in my Father's house. I hear the call to become the parent who welcomes all home and prepares a celebration. The hands that forgive, the hands that console, heal, and offer a festive meal shall be my own. I awaken to the truth that there has never been a separation between me or us and the one source, the great I am. When we hear this parable, it is so easy to focus on the younger son and to a lesser extent on the oldest son. After all, they are presented as flawed, and deep down inside, sometimes that's an easier place to be, is to basically kind of think, well, we all have our flaws, and so I'm like the youngest child, I'm like the oldest child. But I think what we want to be is we want to be like the Father. We want to say the Father is like me. Not just to be forgiven, but be the one who forgives. Not just to welcome home, but be the one that puts out the welcome mat. Not just the one who receives compassion, but who offers it as well. I want to be that person. I now count this as one of my favorite stories in the Bible for leading me to a deeper understanding of my nature as a true child of God. Thank you.